As an example, when our people, in their quest of economic stability, as an example, open up or apply for what is in their mind and in their mental training, and I quote mental training, a bank account, as an example. In their training, they're told that they have a bank account, as an example. When they make an application to the bench of the Pope, the bench of the Pope is also referred to as banks. The account that they're under the impression is their own personal account is actually a loan ledger, unsecured loan ledger account to and for the owners of that bench or bank, with that person who gives them fiat or any other substance of value being actually a secondary party by decree of conditional withdrawals thereafter, which means that all issuances, as an example, from the natural being going into a bank in the name of an account is on the ledger and in legal process an unsecured loan to the bank, quote unquote, an unsecured loan to the bank. So the account that you thought was yours, number one, is not secure, and you agreed to it, but they didn't tell you that you agreed to it. It's a loan to them. They didn't tell you that. It now comes on what is called asset side of their ledgers, which they didn't tell you that. And so now they have created what is known as a colorable jurisdiction, and didn't tell you that either. As an example, go ahead.
Fractional reserve banking
is a perfect example. In other words, that is an ultimate demonstration of fraud in relationship to that operation. It itself is not what you would call the jurisdictional argument. It is a result of the false jurisdiction representation for bringing about a platform by which that fraud can be exercised. That's what I'm making that clear.
Right, because what it does is it allows what they've written into their rules and regulations is that they take your money on deposit or your fiat on deposit, they loan it out to others, they normally get interest, and they don't even have the full deposits on hand where you are many to go to the bank and want to make a withdrawal. If there was a bank run, they don't even have that on deposit, because
the reason why they don't, because it is a fraud in the first instance under a false jurisdiction and a foreign jurisdiction, and in violation of the rules and the laws that govern contracts, because it's a misrepresentation, etc. So here we have people who first are lied to and told that they have money, which was also confiscated under alien, foreign hybrid European jurisdiction under invasion, unwelcomed invasion or hostile invasion, commonly known around the world as colonism, and then started burning books and altering books and then writing themselves in to the history book, claiming to be the people of the land and thus the owners of the land, i.e. creating a false jurisdiction by which this false paradigm of the alien hybrid Europeans being commonly called American, when in fact they're not and never were. Then using that foundation of false information to set up political jurisdictions in violation of the treaties that supersede the Constitution, that is the source of the jurisdictional authority of the seats of operation in political platforms and in legislative platforms and, pardon me, in judicial platforms and in executive structure platforms that have been operating on the land in territorial jurisdiction, exercising political jurisdiction in violation of treaties and constitutions, which is the source of the political problems that you're dealing with today, including the fact of the introduction of ritual murders on the street by contracted commercial mercenaries known as the gangs of New York, who became organized contractors to maintain this fraud, that are now known as Fraternal Order of Police, operating at North America as a military arm. It is actually a military arm, and that is a de facto jurisdiction and logically a problem, but it is done to preserve the corrupt and false platform of territorial jurisdictional claims as quote unquote a country, when in fact it is an invading body of organized alien foreign jurisdictions operating under corporate operations, de facto and bankrupted over and over again as government, etc. And so you have political jurisdiction violations, de facto operations as being legitimate jurisdictions. They, by virtue of their intent of operations, you have a constant problem of jurisdictional probate, etc. This is where they have taken marriage certificates and bundled them and have been selling them as bonds around the world until they were no longer accepted. And then most of you who've been doing a little bit of study are familiar with the alien hybrid European known as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when their private human trafficking corporation went bankrupt again in the late 20s. And they did House Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress in session June the 5th of 1933. And he pledged the birth certificates as bonds to back their debt again for the new, next constructed ens legis United States Corporation Human Trafficking Trading Company that has been continuing the false venue of pretending to be the country when the country is actually Morocco under occupation under the Spanish Inquisition, which is really what's going on. So now you have, again, in personam jurisdiction violations, subject matter jurisdiction violations, constitutional violations, and definitively territorial jurisdiction violations. And I want you to write some of these things down. You may not remember all of them at the moment, but I need you to write these things down in relationship to jurisdiction. Get your pens and papers, all right? Now, as an example, in relationship to any claims that are made, like when, say, some alleged person who represents themselves as some municipal officer, they represent themselves as that, of a city, as an example, which is also a corporation, of a town, etc. And they represent or claim to have authority in your affairs or your property, or taxing you or licensing you and things like that. Your counter to that would be called an averment of jurisdiction, and that thus either in its nature a challenge of the jurisdiction, in fact that they must show quo warranto where they had no jurisdiction in the first instance, or if they under a color of operations, which they usually do, seize jurisdiction under a color of law, then that would be in relationship to that in process, although it would be a colored venue, would be called an appellate jurisdiction. Get familiar with these things because they happen every day. Is that you need to be aware that they're happening every day. You know, so write these down. Appellate jurisdiction, concurrent jurisdiction, contentious jurisdiction, coordinate jurisdiction, criminal jurisdiction, excess of jurisdiction, which you've been suffering every day, exclusive jurisdiction, foreign jurisdiction, general jurisdiction, limited jurisdiction, pendent jurisdiction, that's P-E-N-D-E-N-T, pendent jurisdiction, probate jurisdiction, that's very important because it happens to you every day. Special jurisdiction, that's a conditional jurisdiction where you may have a diversity of nationality or subject matter or issue of in personam jurisdiction, whereas a venue may be used by someone claiming a jurisdiction when actually they have no jurisdiction technically, and then they would have to go back to what you would call treaty or constitutional venues, and that generally would be called a court of special sessions, which we talked about like 30 years ago. We've been teaching you this area for about that time. And in general, the general presentment would be a special jurisdiction. That means the general jurisdictions that have been operative are incompetent and cannot be exercised. And this is, again, when it comes to aberrants of jurisdiction or challenging jurisdiction, these things must be well known among our people, and they need to stop talking racism. They need to learn and understand that what they're suffering is abridgments of jurisdiction, and therefore they need to get commonly acquainted with what is actually going on and not what they've been told is going on. It's not the color of their skin, it's jurisdiction. It's not racism. Race is a paradigm set up particularly by some hybrid Europeans dealing with phenotype, and the most commonly well known is Frederick Johann Blumenbach, and you have Carlos Linnaeus, which is the most common one, and you're dealing with the 1700s, which is used by the human trafficking trading company known as United States Corporation Company that has been falsely presented to the world in reconstructed history as the country. And logically, the people don't know that it's actually a foreign corporate jurisdiction when they think it's a country jurisdiction. This is very important. This is why we're going over this. I know many of you already have this information, already know it, but because of the politics that are taking place right now with the world nation states ceasing to buy U.S. Treasury bonds, which were set up in around 1861-62, which is why they altered the congressional records so that the people don't see a lot of the shenanigans that were going on during that time. And they set up the Treasury bonds to build a corporate structure to sell these bonds on the world to the world after the murder of Abraham Lincoln and the corruption of the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation, and also the issue of manumission. Write that down. It's not the subject matter right now, but you're going to have that in the concept of your mind while you're looking at these things. Because the persons who you've been thinking were your congressmen and your senators are dealing with these various issues that I'm talking about right now every day, as they have robbed you blind and created this economic problem that you're suffering from right now. That's hidden behind this COVID-19 argument, etc. That's a fact. And so you're really dealing with jurisdictional issues. And while you're looking at all of these things, look at jurisdiction. Now, so you're dealing with pendent jurisdiction, probate jurisdiction, special jurisdiction, summary jurisdiction, territorial jurisdiction, and voluntary jurisdiction. Now, what they've been doing, the organized criminals have been claiming that our people, who are the really Aboriginal and indigenous true Americans of the land, who was really Africans, etc. They're not people of color. That creates another false jurisdiction. When you hear the legal term or phrase people of color, that's actually a creation of an alien, non-human, artificial jurisdiction, and that would be called a voluntary jurisdiction when the people call themselves colored people or people of color, not knowing that it means artificial person. So that is a legal declaration of the beings natural, otherwise being natural, living, divine beings in human flesh, being declared as dead or corpse in law, and therefore outside of the venues of treaties and constitutions, and thus those principles of treaties and constitution that refer to and deal with the estates and liberties of the living does not apply to persons listed as persons of color, because that means artificial person, a semblance, a simulacrum distinguished from that which is real. So go in your law book and look up colored and colored persons, because we don't need to go into that because we've been over this for decades. You need to start really understanding what's happening. So now they have created a false paradigm and a false jurisdiction and gotten our people through ignorance of not understanding jurisdiction, claiming to be people of color, thinking it's a badge of honor, not knowing they told the world legally that they were legally and in law dead in law. That would be listed under what is called voluntary jurisdiction, and thus it would be considered in law process of rights and liberties and the states, etc., consent. And then the exercise thereafter would be what you would call jurisdictional probate. And so under that jurisdiction operations, this is how and why, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt and a lot of these board of directors claiming to be congressmen and senators have been able to float bonds and take finance or energy from the people here and give it to private foreign corporations, which are part of the Roman Curia in other countries. And I know you've heard these terms constantly. As an example, you can go to in many areas around the land at North America and see the poverty, the lack of resources of the people, the suffering, and yet the people that you thought were your congressmen and senators voted to send, as an example, 8, 10, 15, 20, 30 billion dollars to one of their pet project, so-called other nations, of which 90% of them have vestment because they are not really true Americans and never were. And they've been robbing you systematically, and you've allowed it to happen because you thought that they were sending finances to other countries and putting the debt on you, and then calling that debt national debt when they are not nationals. They were putting it on the nationals.
I think they actually told the truth because they call it foreign aid.
Of course they do.
And that's exactly what it is. They're foreigners and they're aiding themselves.
Yeah, it's of course. Now, and this is back to do the people understand jurisdiction? Because they're telling you what they've done.
Yeah.
It's just that our people not understanding jurisdiction, it doesn't dawn on them that they're telling the people to the face, we just robbed you under a color of law, and you've consented to it under voluntary jurisdiction. Why do you think they say with the IRS as a point of fact? Now you have another foreign jurisdiction operating on the land in violation of treaty and in violation of constitution, and they're saying to you taxes are voluntary. That's voluntary jurisdiction, and yet they impose it under a color of law mandatory and will steal your estate if you don't give it up voluntarily, which is an act of war. Now you have what? Foreign alien jurisdictions waging war against the people under the guise of being legitimate government, having no delegated authority whatsoever in personam, subject matter, and particularly territorial. And they have been getting away with it. And now you're all suffering from this economic blow. The systems that have been used to systematically rob you under the Spanish Inquisition has gotten so corrupt that it's collapsing the trusts of the world, and thus the trade windows of the world, and also thus the credit windows of the world, which is really what's going on. And unfortunately, many people who should be don't want to discuss these things. But I'm pleased to know, that a lot of the youth that are becoming conscious of what's really going on have been brave enough to speak up when a lot of the, alleged adults not only won't speak up, but are sorely afraid to even get into the subject matter. Nevertheless, they have participated in, and many of them are part of corporate jurisdictional organizations that come under the jurisdictions of many of these de facto corporate state jurisdictions, and exercise such powers in the name of dealing with the rights of the people, the liberties of the people, etc., when actually they are known and can be proven easily, once you understand jurisdiction, to be criminal operations and criminal enterprises by people that may look just like you, that you thought were operating properly in jurisdiction, when actually they're subdivisions of a criminal operation, i.e. known as the United States Trading Service Company, which is not a country, never was. Now that's the truth. Get over it and learn about jurisdiction. Or was it, I was feeling you was going to ask me something else.
I just wanted to say that a lot of people, like you said, are not aware of the fact that the U.S. Service Corporation is a corporation, not a country, and that the situation that we're undergoing right now is not national, it is global. Because of the tentacles that are more global, we see ourselves as separate, not realizing that
Yes.
we will say sometimes that we are under occupation, but not realizing that just like we see when the U.S. would go over to, say, Vietnam or one of these other countries and take up it, that's exactly what is going on here.
Now, look at your statement that you just made. And this is where understanding jurisdiction, again, comes in comprehension becomes important. The training, because it's also training, the linguistic training of referring to the foreign corporation as person. And so we say the U.S. went there, the U.S. didn't go anywhere. The owners of the U.S. corporation, who are beneficiaries of the human trafficking corporation styled as the U.S. for their own benefit, have been exercising war powers in violation of international law, in violation of treaties, and in violation of Constitution, to which they are by law to be a creature, which they are not. On multiple levels can be easily proven not only to be a criminal enterprise that doesn't take deep thought, but by the rule of law of treaties and Constitution, it's absolutely obvious. However, again, subject matter tonight, why is it not on the lips of the people talking about this properly? Why do the people keep calling the U.S. person? Why do they keep, it's like somebody say, the car went over here and ran over my lawn. The car did not run over your lawn. The person who was operating that vehicle by choice, or usually not by accident, rolled over your lawn because they're pissed off because you wouldn't give them some of your flowers, so they ran over your flowers. Now, you can charge the car all you want to. Now, let the car testify. Can the car testify?
Nope.
Does the car steer itself?
Nope.
Oh, who steered the car?
Some
living man or woman, etc. Who has jurisdiction over that car?
The operator.
And they're sitting behind what is known as the steering wheel, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
So the car did nothing. But when you say that the car did something, you just, again, created a false jurisdiction. This is part of the linguistic corruption that has caused us unknowingly to do what is called voluntary jurisdiction, and thus consent to the injury that is perpetrated under a color law. And this is, again, why over the years, a lot of times people think that we're being picky when we stop them and say, no, stop. Know the distinction between the living and the dead. Those are jurisdictions. They absolutely are. And this is why, as an example, you'll see in international law, as an example, for those of you who do a little bit of research, certain arguments that come in international law, some of the recent ones that are very effective and that affect everybody in the commercial world would be the arguments that was brought before the International Court of Law between France and the corporate country, and the owners of the United States. And keep in mind, we're going to go into this, but you've heard us talk about this here and there. The United States platform owners lost the case. This has much to do with what we talk about in lesson book 14 and 14A1 years ago in 92, 3, 4, 5, and 6, with Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was CEO of the United States Service Corporation Company at that time in 1954 to 1956, relinquished jurisdiction at Morocco, which is actually the land, because they made claims on the land under the unum sanctum operations, which they've been operating under colonial operations. And when they lost that case to France, who actually had a superior claim, because that's what that case is really all about. And you see people don't talk about that because they don't want people to know that these persons who own the United States Corporation Company clearly, not only by law and right, have no jurisdiction over the people. They have no jurisdiction to be continuously operating on the land of North America. And so you see a lot of the motivations of them creating, particularly, and exercising and what you call accelerating their operations under a color of law during the 1954 to the 1960 area. And then you recognize, if you understand the real politics, what we're telling you, jurisdiction, why Dwight D. Eisenhower, when he saw that happening, etc., warned the people of the industrial military, the congressional industrial military complex. If you don't understand jurisdiction, that's just some kind of historical statement that you hear and people talk about and not understand what it actually means. And they don't necessarily understand what is the motivation as to why Dwight D. Eisenhower relinquished jurisdiction at Morocco. And now you have the issues of the treaties, etc., that people don't want to talk about, etc. And this is has much to do when I did lesson book 14 years ago, that I split the books, because it was hard enough to get the people even to look at these matters, less more take these matters seriously. And so I did 14A1, Protocols of Liberty, which at that time we did not desktop publish, which many of you who have a history with us know about that. But you need to know the motivations behind it. So you're really talking about jurisdictions, and people, particularly our people, really have no idea how far-reaching, how in-depth, and how serious this matter is concerning jurisdiction. Yes, go ahead.
Question, with regard to these persons that have jurisdiction, claim jurisdiction over the land.
And I respectfully say this is what we must do. And this is part of what we're talking about right now. We've got to start carefully picking our words and start consciously, because this is what's been happening. I'll tell you what's happening. And a lot of times when, over the years, you'll see me correct people. And what I recognize, that they many times they don't really get the seriousness of why that correction is made, because you're having conversations with people that are working towards fixing these things, and it's sort of like getting someone to put a filter on a dirty water source and discussing the filter and why they put it on there, and then defecating it in the water after it comes through the filter.